This year, absentee vote.
Okay, so you want to open a bar. No, no, it's not a bar. It's a social space. Okay, well, it's a club. Well, it's a club, but it's really about artists and about engaging in the community. We want a screening room. But we also would love a bar and a coffee area where people can hang out. It would be great if we had tenants involved, but it would also be great if we had an upper space where people could work and flow together. We want to incubate, we want to encourage and socialize. A place where you can just relax between meetings or obligations. A place where you can have an idea and say, hey, you know what would be great if we could do this or we could do that. That's what this space is all about.
practices photography. Even as a teenager, as a student, I went on nuclear disarmament protests. I went on the right to work protests in Scotland, women's rights marches in Washington. You know, I'm very big on that sort of stuff. I think it's a really important thing that we give voice and we protest. If we didn't do that, a lot of things in this world would never have changed.
Since I started with Running Rebels, one of the main things that we tried to do was use music as a way to not only connect with young people, but also to just raise awareness for issues.
The passion of music has always been there and just continuing to get better.
We're able to take some of the work that we're doing on the ground level, put it into our music to be able to broadcast that out into more platforms so people are able to feel like they're being heard.
When you have that appreciation and you find value in your own voice and what you bring to the table, that helps you grow and develop.
COVID, the unrest, everything, it's affecting everybody in the same way.
Now is definitely an interesting time, but just proud of being here and celebrating our 40th year this year for Running Rebels.
How do we speak loud without words? I'm challenging myself using my craft. All I want to do is create a gender-free, a racist-free, a terror-free environment with my piece where everybody is celebrated for who they are.
Visual arts is a place where I really feel like social practice has the ability to spark social change. I'm a great negotiator. I'm a great fact finder. I like research. I love interacting with people. Why not use my art for community conversations about the things that trouble us?
I'll say first, my
Conversation with John Ridley. John is a Milwaukee native. In 2014, he won an Academy Award for writing 12 Years a Slave and was the creator, director, and executive producer of ABC's Emmy-winning anthology series American Crime. John Ridley will make his Marvel Comics debut with Wolverine, Black, White, and Blood in January, and he has penned an anthology for DC Comics' The Future State titled The Next Batman. In the fall of 2018, Ridley opened No Studios, a space for the arts and community in his hometown of Milwaukee. Each year, No Studios hosts a social justice summit designed to bring people together to discuss issues connected to social and economic equity. Our guest, Dr. Yusef Salaam, known for being one of the exonerated 5 who in 1989 were tried and convicted of the crime in a frenzied case that rocked New York City. Their convictions were vacated in 2002 for the Central Park jogger case when the DNA evidence and a confession proved their cases. Yusef Salaam was just 15 years old when his life was upended and changed forever. Since his release, Yusef has committed himself to advocating and educating people on the issues of false confessions, police brutality, misconduct, press ethics and bias, race and law, and the disparities in America's criminal justice system. I now present to you all John Ridley.
Hi, I'm John Ridley. I'm the founder of No Studios in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We founded No Studios 2 years ago on the concept that we as people are better when we're together. And we're together at our best during communal experiences, when we share together, when we laugh together, sometimes even when we cry together. And in that spirit, we started 2 years ago Art Activated, which is our social justice summit. And I want to welcome all of you who are viewing tonight to our 2020 edition. When people talk about social justice, sometimes they talk about statistics, they use graphs, they use concepts. But one of the things that we have to be hyper aware of is that social justice is about real people, and it has real effects and real consequences. And our guest this evening is truly the personification of what happens when social justice works against an individual, but also when someone dedicates their life to social justice. And our guest this evening is an individual who is a family man, he's a father, he's a poet, he's an activist, he's an inspirational speaker, and more importantly, he regularly advocates for criminal justice reform, prison reform, and the abolition of juvenile solitary confinement. A remarkable individual. It is our honor and our pleasure to welcome this evening Dr. Yusef Salaam to our program. Doctor, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on your show.
Again, it is a pleasure in so many regards. What you represent, the spirit that you have, what you've endured is absolutely remarkable. For me, your experience, I was in New York at that time. There are a lot of individuals who, unfortunately, what happened, it's almost, I hate to say ancient history. So I want to walk through a little bit about what happened, but then I want to roll back and really talk about you as a person, because one of the things, unfortunately, when people become a statistic, we forget that they're real people. There was an incident in New York that you were involved in, you were caught up in, let me say that. You were caught up in 1989. And for a lot of people, they may not recall New York in 1989, you know, it was a very rough place. Crime was out of control, murders, rapes, robberies. It was a city on edge, but unfortunately in a lot of cities on edge, they equate crime with black and brown individuals. In 1989, April of 1989, there was a very serious crime. There was a young woman in Central Park who was raped, who was brutalized. There was no question that a crime took place, but in the rush, and I do mean the rush, to make a point in that the police were working towards this, that they were cleaning up the city, that they were going to spare no expense in bringing in a suspect or suspects. Several individuals were brought in. That the individuals who were suspects were winnowed down to 6. All were essentially underage, minors. The oldest was 16. Although he was 16, he was tried as an adult. It became about what were called, and again, in this catch-all, the Central Park Five. You were one of those individuals, 15 years old. There are no two ways about it. You were, and the other defendants, completely, utterly railroaded by the system. That's not opinion. You were all completely exonerated years later. We're going to get into that. We're going to talk about that. But before we get into that, you were a young man. You were in New York. You were living your life. You were from model families who were just living as society expects people to live. But just talk about what your life was like before April 19th of 1989, so that we can just get a sense of you as a young man and how you were growing up and what your life was like.
You know, I mean, I think one of the biggest ideas that has to be explained is the naivety that we all experience as children, and the dream that we want and we imagine America to be, without having been able to understand where we truly are. I remember reading this statement recently that Dr. James Baldwin said. He said, to be African American is to be American without any privilege and African without memory. And I think when we look at those two dynamics play out, we realize that, you know, part of the crime in America is the vilification of young people. The fearful attributes that are placed upon Black and brown children plays out in the theater of America. And so as we run around in our lives, we look around and we see young people sometimes with their pants sagging. We see young people sometimes doing what we consider gang signs, talking in a manner that we feel needs to be clarified and rectified. But the reality is that we are defining for them what we see, and we are not giving them the opportunity to define for themselves who they are. And so my vision of America when I was growing up was that it was a very nice, very, very safe space, that I was able to dream the wildest of dreams and reach the highest of heights, that there was nothing that could not be attained. And that thing that I may have wanted to have attained might have been just being able to ride my skateboard freely through the streets, ride my bike, you know, just normal things that children do, climb trees in Central Park. Central Park was our backyard. It was literally our backyard. It was literally the place that we played like a playground. And in this particular incident, yes, there was a woman that was raped and left for dead, but the other crime, not as equal, but the other crime was the vilification of us and using us as scapegoats because they wanted to solve this crime and solve it quickly. Because as you look at the people who are being represented, they didn't look like me. And so as we looked around our communities, we didn't have, great things to look at. We turned our negatives into positives. We made basketball courts with milk crates. We flipped on dirty mattresses. And we didn't think anything bad about it, right? We drank from fire hoses that had rust coming out of it. This was something normal to see in America in my youth, and something that we grew through. I was a great graphic designer. I wanted to be a hip hop artist. Actually, I remember walking into ASCAP Records at 12 years old and picking up back then what was called rap applications. They actually had rap applications. And, when I came home and started my speaking career, I remember after the documentary, The Central Park Five, was released, we started really, really going around to different schools and being in junior high schools and elementary schools and talking to young people. And I'll never forget, I went into this one school and the teacher said, we got one of the members of the Central Park Five. And one of the youngsters said, are you guys a member of a rap group? And you began earlier saying that it's almost ancient times now, right? This is 31 years later. And the beautiful thing about it is that we've survived. We've survived in such a really powerful way, but we've also done many, many more things other than just survive, right? We've created books, we've been speaking, we've been, doing other movies and other ventures. Raymond Santana has a clothing line. I started my own clothing line and also jewelry line, and so there's a whole host of things that this really blossoms into when we really got away from the gravitational pull of all of the dark mire that they wanted us to be in.
I appreciate you saying that, because one of the things, we have these conversations now and people say, there are some people who assert that if you have sensitivity training, if you talk about systemic racism, you're saying you don't love this country. You're saying you don't love this society. But as you put it, you found beauty where you could find it. You found life where you could find it. To point out inequities is not to say, hey, we don't love this country. It's to say that we love this country despite these things that we're challenged with, despite these things that are put in front of us. Do you remember as a young person, I remember the first time I had to have the conversation with our son. And I think the prevailing culture is more aware that people of color have to have these conversations the same way, moms have to have conversations with their daughters about just walking through parking lots or things like that. Do you remember before April 19th having a conversation, somebody saying to you, hey, it's going to be different? Because you talk about just looking at life and Central Park being your backyard and this is your city as much as anybody else. Before all this happened, do you remember somebody saying, you know what, it's not quite the same, and be careful and be mindful?
Well, one of the things that I couldn't grapple with was my mother would tell me often that she was raised in the Jim Crow South. And being in New York, it's hard to really understand what that means, because, on the one hand, you have racism that's happening, but it's covert. And in the cloak of what is being described, explained, carried out, we're also told, no, I don't think that way. I have Black friends. What do you mean? Right? So we see a Donald Trump show up in all kinds of Black music and videos and, culture and all of this stuff. He's almost celebrated in such a way where people wrote songs about Donald Trump. I want to be rich like Donald Trump and Marla Maple, And then you fast forward to the unattainable reality of what a Donald Trump represented. Because of the color of his skin, he was able to walk through doors that we would never be able to walk through, even if we had the money. We may be able to go through some of those doors only because they want to get the money from us. And then they'll leave us by the backside. And so I think that part of the unfortunate aspect of America is that duality that happens. I mean, every child should be given the opportunity through the people who are more mindful of who that child is. They should be given the opportunity to teach those children and to have those children understand that they were born on purpose and that they have a purpose. But unfortunately, systemically, the system tells us you were born a mistake. And the worst part is that if you believe that, you begin to move throughout your life as if you are a mistake. You begin to make overwhelming mistakes. You don't become your hope, your own dream, your own savior. And you're the only one that's going to save you, even in prison, right? My mother couldn't do that time for me. My brother and my sisters couldn't do that time for me. I had to do the time. I had to make sure that I did not become a victim of time. And so in me doing the time, it became important that I had to realize that I was my own savior, that I had to remind myself that I am a victim of this system. But more importantly, I am a victor, and I am going to rise to the occasion and survive. And here we are 31 years later, and we can speak to the truth of that testament to a degree, but then it's the how. It is the reminder, the constant reminder that you have to tell yourself that you're going to make it, that you're going to survive. And I think that that's the other part, because, systemically, they're betting on us not to know. They say that our ignorance is $1 trillion industry. I mean, think about that for a second. Our ignorance is $1 trillion industry. Even when it comes to the prison industrial complex, they're betting on us to go back. That's why they tell us, we'll see you later. They give us a wink and a nod. They don't say, hey man, listen, do everything and anything you can do to make sure you never come back. They say, we'll see you later. And so in the prison number, especially in New York, they have this, I'm sure, throughout the nation. But in New York, I remember, because of course I was there, that you either had a number, which signified the year, A, which signified the first half of the year, or B, that signified the second half, or R, that signified you left and you came back. But the most important part of that number, I think, was the next part. That next part told your position in line. So my number was 95A1113. 95 signified the year, A signified the first half of the year, 1113. That's the position. And so I turned 21 in February. I turned 21 and they sent me to the big house. And they gave me the number in line. You take your number, sometimes you're waiting for food, you pull your number. My number in line was 1,113. That's how many people had come before me, 1,112. And I'm saying that this was February. And so if you look at that in the context of not just the prison that I was in, but in New York State, if you look at that in the context of the nation, you realize that the real story is being told, that this is a criminal system of injustice, right? The real story that's being told is that slavery is alive and well by the 13th Amendment, that this is the new modern day cotton fields. But we have to break out of that gravitational pull of negativity and make something of ourselves. And even though they're telling us this is who we are, we have to refuse.
You talk about that gravitational pull of negativity and them telling you who you are. I was in New York when all of this was happening. And you talk about bias in media. I work in media. And I look back on it now that the prevailing culture in media, the journalists whose responsibility it is to dig for the truth, to find the truth, the facts were there. That neither you nor any of the other four were involved, could have been involved in this crime. One of the most glaring incidents, and as you say, a horrible crime was committed. We know that. But that this young woman was dragged from the streets in Central Park down into a gully where she was just brutalized in the most horrific fashion. It had been raining, it was wet. Literally, the footprints did not allow for a mass assault. How did you maintain your sense of self when New York, the largest media market in America, one of them in the world, the newspapers, the journalists, the prevailing culture beat the drum so loudly saying guilty, guilty, guilty. We don't even need a trial. There were op-eds written, ads taken out, the most horrible things said, calls for the death penalty to be brought back. 15 years old, facing that, how did you maintain your sense of self and not be pulled in that negativity and say, it's against me, I cannot survive, I cannot, as you say, do the time, even though there was no time that you should have done, you stood, you did it for your family, for yourself, because you had to. How?
I had to be reminded every step of the way. Some of those reminders came in letters from my grandmother. I'll never forget, my grandmother would write me every time she wrote. She addressed it to Master Yusef Salaam. Now imagine that. Not only was I getting the letters that my grandmother wrote me, but the officers who had to screen the mail was reading, this letter is to Master Yusef Salaam. And so as I'm looking at this, I'm saying to myself, wow, this is deep. I am bigger than what it is that I think I am supposed to be. And I think that that's the part that was important. You know, that part was something that even in my poetry as I write, you know, this book, Punching the Air, that E.B. wrote, is written in verse. And we wrote it because it was really based on the language that was used through my book of poetry. You know, poetry was my outlet. It was the thing that allowed me to constantly remain free mentally, even though my body was in bondage. You know, remind yourself will allow you to live through anyhow. As they say, when you're walking through hell, keep on walking. You know, and that's where it's at. You got to just keep on putting one foot in front of the other. You have to begin to believe. You have to begin to imagine. They say the imagination is the precursor of what is to come. But when you marry your imagination with the feeling of what it would feel like, I tell college students this all the time, that if they really understand how this works, as a first year student, and even if you're already in, and you're maybe a year, 2 years in, when you realize how this thing works, you can visualize yourself graduating. You can visualize yourself taking that tassel and moving it from one side of the hat to the next. But marry it with the feeling of what it would feel like to be celebrated. That's how you get through the dark days, the I can't days, the days where you want to give up hope. You then become your worst enemy. You start having the self-defeatist mentality when no one is coming to save you but yourself. And once you do the work, it becomes so much easier. It becomes a part of your DNA. And as you begin to move mountains, it looks like magic. But really, it's about you being intentional and purposeful and living in your purpose.
You know, you talk about having the strength for yourself, and your strength was absolutely amazing. But when we talk about some of the miscarriage of justice, not just what went on in the courtroom or with the police, you were minors. Typically, the media does not report the names of minors who are involved in crimes. Your names were released. Your names were made public. People found out where you lived, where your families were. They went there. They vented their frustrations with complete ignorance of the facts. It's one thing for one to find strength in oneself, but when your families were vilified, when your loved ones were out there day after day in front of the courtroom saying they're innocent, and people were saying, well, you're crazy, you're just a crazy mother, you're a crazy father. How did you find the strength, or how did you find a way, if you could, to forgive the masses and say, almost in a messianic fashion, forgive them, they don't know what they do? How did you find the strength? It's one thing for oneself, but when you see your loved ones demonized, vilified, how did you find the strength then to maintain a sense of purpose?
Well, I think part of the ability to forgive is not to forget, but forgiveness a lot of times is so that you can surgically remove yourself from the ball and chain that's weighing you down, that you want, and that's creating this wantingness inside of you to get some type of justice through that. So it would have been great for Donald Trump to apologize for taking out the full-page ad calling for the state to kill us. But what happened instead was that it opened up the door for people to say, well, let's just write their names in the papers. I'll never forget, on the heels of what Donald Trump did, Pat Buchanan wrote in the papers, well, why don't we just take the eldest one and hang him from a tree in Central Park? And he summed up what he was saying, that we should do this by June 1st. And I'm saying that because when you think about what was going on, them putting our names, phone numbers, and addresses in New York City's newspapers, this was something that was a no-no. But because it was us, it was more attractive for it to be us. It was more attractive for them to paint the picture in a way that made it seize on the fears of the public, and also made the police departments appear to be doing a masterful job. And also, and this is, I think, perhaps the most important part, it also kept us in a box, right? It kept us in a box because the system continues to look in a suspicious eye at us, because we are just trying to move through life and trying to make lemons out of lemonade. But then at the same time, too, if we accepted, we lost. Once we begin to accept the definition of ourselves presented to us from someone else, we lose. It's like, I always read this particular piece, this passage in our book, Punching the Air. And I feel like it's such an important passage. It's found on page 56, and it's called Clone. And it says, basically, ever since that day in the 5th grade, my teachers watched me so hard, so close, that I felt like I was trying to break out of prison, even though it was just school. Every dumb thing I did, they thought it was because of trouble at home, an absent father, a tired mother, not enough books, not enough vegetables, not enough sleep. They believed those lies about me and made themselves a whole other boy in their minds and replaced me with him. And I think that passage is what happens to many of us. We get passed over. We get defined, and then we get prescriptions added to us that then change who we are and what we are supposed to be. I often say that if you look at a Kevin Hart as an example, and all the Kevin Harts of the world, you get the opportunity to realize that there is a brilliance and a purpose that is wrapped in that person called Kevin Hart. There's a brilliance and a purpose that's wrapped in that person that exhibits the same type of behavior of a Michael Jordan throwing balled up pieces of paper in the trash can from the back of a room. The need to be able to look at those individuals and say to the people who care about them that they should take their God-given talents further and further shape it and massage it and make it into something. That's what we should be doing, instead of putting them into detention, suspending them from school, doing things like that. The more life we can pour into the children, the more value we get added to our own selves, because we're pouring into the future of tomorrow. We're pouring into the future caretakers of the world.
I'm talking to Dr. Yusef Salaam. His book, Punching the Air, is available everywhere. It has been called important, powerful, beautiful. It is a book that speaks to young lives, speaks to consequences, but does so in a language, as you say, in a poetry and spoken word and verse that makes it incredibly, I think, immediate and urgent for everyone, but certainly for young kids of color. You have dedicated much of your life to talking about prison reform, criminal justice reform. We are in a time now where it seems like we are locked in a cycle of broken trust, of encounters that turn violent, of protests that begin and are certainly largely peaceful. But unfortunately, whether it's outside agitators or anger or people who just feel like there's no other way to make themselves heard, that becomes violence. And then there seems to be just a lack of real initiative, lack of real communication, lack of real change. You've worked in this space. You've been in this space. For you right now, as we go into these final phases of this election or post-election, what kinds of real reforms would you like to see across the board, beginning with communities and policing and all the way through prison reforms that don't just take every young individual and that's all there is? It's incarceration, it's not education. It's incarceration, it's not reform, and treating every crime essentially equally. That all there is to be done is to lock up young men and young women, but certainly young Black and brown men, and put them into a system where, as you say, once they leave, they say, hey, we'll see you later, because that's pretty much all there is. What would you like to see done?
Well, I mean, the thing about it is that we look at it from two different vantage points. On one hand, we want to be able to say that it's about reform. And on the other hand, it's about abolition. Because the system is not broken. The system is actually alive and sick and working exactly as it was imagined. And we find this because even when you read the words, we the people, we knew that we were not considered full persons back then when that statement was being created. We knew that as we look at the 13th Amendment, for it to have the word slavery in it, we know that that is a purposeful thing, but it's also coded language that lets us know that we are the ones that are the overwhelming majority in the prison industrial complex. And so therefore this becomes the modern day cotton fields. The need, I think, now is for things to begin to change, but also for us to begin to participate in a way we've never participated before. This is about life and death. And I'm talking about it from the perspective of not today or tomorrow, but I'm talking about generations from now. I'm talking about we have the opportunity now to change everything. We can be living in a new and better America, right? And the greatest thing about it too, I think, is as we look at what we have, we can automatically fix all, there should be no reason why racist laws should still be on the books. You know that they have a law, and I forget exactly which state I saw this in, but they have a law that says it's not illegal for a law enforcement officer to rape a female victim that he's arrested. We were shocked when we heard about Trayvon Martin. That was like utterly, what are you talking? This does not make sense. You mean to tell me that they have a law that allows a person to say, I was standing my ground? Right? Psychologically, we understand a whole lot of things about young people. And one of the things is that a hoodie is not a weapon.
Right.
And most times if a child has a hoodie on and they pull the hoodie over their heads, they have just created a sacred, safe space for themselves. Yeah. They are not a threat. But to make that type of behavior into something that should be vilified is where the problem lies. And a lot of these laws, as I said, are on the books because this is how they were created. They were not created for us, but these laws were created out of the Emancipation Proclamation. And so therefore we had vagrancy laws. We had laws that said you couldn't congregate in numbers that were bigger than this. You couldn't be grouped up together, and we could be grouped up talking about the Pythagorean theorem. We could be doing any number of things, but the assumptions that are made, it blew my mind when I found out that they had something called laugh boxes, or laugh barrels, where as if we were having a good time and we happened to be laughing and, slapping each other. Man, that was a good one. If we saw a white person walking down the road, we had to either stop ourselves from laughing just like that, or we had to put our heads in a laugh barrel until we was able to stop laughing. This was part of the law. And in many ways, when you think about some of the rhetoric that has been coming out, not just yesterday, but all throughout this campaign, we hear things like, there were good people on both sides when it relates to Charlottesville. I mean, you have people coming out of the woodwork talking about blood and soil with tiki torches. You have people saying things like states' rights without giving you the full statement. States' rights to what? To own slaves.
Right.
And so to make America great again was the idea that we were only great when we were slaves and subjugated underneath the oppression of the white man. And the great thing about today, I think, is that we have people who are using their skin color in their privilege to really speak truth to power, to really keep the doors open, to allow us to bring our folding chairs to the table in the vein of a Shirley Chisholm. And more importantly, to create our own tables.
Right.
And I think that it's that reality that gives me the inclination to understand that we're not fighting a race war. This is not about black and white. We are fighting spiritual wickedness in high and low places. That's what we're really fighting against. Because the people who truly want good, even if they happen not to look like us, they are exhibiting and are becoming the embodiment of Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, where we become the kaleidoscope of the human family.
You talk about us, people of color, black and brown people, black people in particular, continuing to participate or the urgent need to participate yet more. Election is about 2 weeks away. There's a movement with many black men, in particular young black men, who they want to sit out this election. They don't feel like it matters. And frankly, as much as I love President Obama, things didn't get markedly better in many cities, including the city we're in right now in Milwaukee. Certainly don't think that they got much better under the current administration. What do you say to young black men in particular who are like, well, what difference does it make? What difference does my vote make? It doesn't get better. It's 2020. And as you say, there's still systemic bias, certainly in prison, in law. We see it now with healthcare. What would you say to folks who say, what difference does my vote make? It's not going to change.
So what we are not taught is what we used to be taught. Like my mother said that when she was growing up, they taught civics in school. And what we learned about civics is that there are layers to government. And in terms of the participation, there is absolutely no way that we will truly understand this without really understanding that not participating is participating. You cannot be in a system, underneath a system's rule, and say, I am going to not participate because they are going to do this, whatever that this is. My thing is this: we have to begin to really have the true conversations. And those true conversations have to deal with and include us being able to be a person who stands up to be counted. We have to say to ourselves, are we going to allow things to be the way they are, or are we going to be a part of the solution? And so being a part of the solution can be what? We can begin to change things brick by brick, right? The streets are, our ancestors' wildest dreams are in the streets, and the streets are erupting, saying abolition. But we know that even in abolition, it takes time. You can't just automatically bulldoze something and therefore something else will be in its place. No, you have to begin to work towards that process. And as you work towards that process, some of the things that you have to do have to be a part of being a spook who sat by the door. You have to look at yourself and say, like Raymond Santana says all the time, occupy all spaces. Because we need people on the inside working. just like we need people on the outside working. Everybody has to work together because we are not outnumbered. We are out-organized. And when we look at it from that perspective, then we can move mountains. Then we can have a game plan that doesn't have the limitation of just planning for the weekend, just planning for a 5-year stretch. But we're planning generationally, intergenerationally. We're building a strategy that tells us and tells everybody who comes behind us, never again. We can look at all of the things that were positive in the past and all of the things that caused us to fall in the past, and we can build on those things so that we will never experience those same things. But what we have to never forget is that as we build anew, they are also planning. And when I say they, I'm talking about the people who really want to be close to the gravitational pull of all things negative. They don't want to see you succeed. They want to tell you you are a crab in the barrel, but they don't want to tell you that your natural habitat was never in the barrel. And so as we try to get out of it, we say, oh man, they're getting out. Let me help. Let me see if I can crab onto their coattails and get out of this myself. And we end up looking like crabs in a barrel, pulling each other back down. When the true strategy should never be, even in the era of a Barack Obama, we can't look at him, and I think he was the perhaps biggest example of why we can't look at the person who is in power and think that everything that they look like they represent will be changed for our benefit. Because they too are fighting against and in a system that wants to keep things the way that they are. And so our strategy should be that we need to shore up, build up, prepare, put forth individuals that will be able to continue to keep their eyes on the prize as they're in these positions of power. That they're not swayed by finances. Because even as Kanye West said, when he was considered the same Kanye, right? He said, even if you in a Benz, you still are in a coupe.
Yeah.
Because it was the idea and the understanding. I forget exactly who created this explanation. It was such a brilliant explanation. It's the idea that as you are driving around in community, you're still driving around in America.
Right.
It's still not free, right? We want the idea of what is free without having to participate in our own true freedom. And I think that as we begin to understand that we have to participate, then we know that if we don't participate, non-participation is participation. Because the bigger conversation should never be, well, it's only the Republicans against the Democrats or the Democrats against the Republicans. That should not be the beginning and the end of the conversation. The conversation has to continue with what is the strategy for tomorrow. This is what it is today. But what is our strategy for tomorrow? Because if we don't participate, they will continue to push all of the agendas that they have forward, and we will continue to say, see, I told you so.
Yeah, politics is a power grab. I mean, that's a reality. And each side tries to grab that power. And I think for any underrepresented community, we have to grab power. That's through the vote, that's through participation, and that's through holding these individuals accountable every step of the way. I'm talking with Dr. Yusef Salaam. He is a member of the Exonerated Five. He has a book called Punching the Air, which has been called Extraordinary and a book for the ages. I wanted to ask you a question that I think your perspective is one of the few people who can really speak to both sides. We are in moments of reckoning. Certainly with race right now, people recognize the systemic bias that is in the system and that is particularly weighted against young Black males. And you were victimized by that in 1989. We're also in a space where men have to reconcile their complicity in what is now called the Me Too moment, where women have historically been victimized, where women have been assaulted, raped, not even in just odd spaces, but at work. For you, how do you balance, or how would you suggest, if you can, how we balance, and I want to make it very clear that in particular, Black men being accused of sexual assault, of rape, this goes back to the slave era, this goes back to the Scottsboro Boys, this goes back to Emmett Till, this even goes up to a few months ago where we saw a white woman in Central Park who was just asked to put her dog on a leash, who felt that she could call the police and saying that she was threatened and being assaulted by a Black male. We know, as you know, in Central Park, the crime you were accused of, it happened. None of those individuals had a single thing to do with it, but a crime was committed. How do we balance believing, particularly with sexual assault, women, and with also believing those individuals like yourselves who are afforded and should be afforded due process?
Well, see, we're talking about, in many ways, the technology that happens all the time in the Black and brown communities. And so, like in the Central Park jogger case, we can't ever forget some of the tools that were being used. Big headlines that said things like DNA evidence. And when the DNA evidence came back and didn't match any one of us, those big headlines didn't say DNA doesn't match. There were smaller headlines that said DNA doesn't match. The reason why I say that is because what lingers in the minds of people is the negative residue that those headlines put out there. And so it makes people believe and think that in the Black and brown communities, these individuals that are being paraded in front of us, they're actually guilty. They are the guilty culprits and need to be dealt with. But whenever they parade people in front of us who have, like I say, called the complexion for acceptance, they find their best photograph. With the Central Park jogger case, what people did not realize was that we then did not have a voice, but we have a voice now. And we can talk about what happened inside of the system, and we can talk about how they should never have done what they did because we survived it. But when they make people believe the most worst and most heinous things about us, and we have not the opportunity to mount a proper defense. My attorney, the late, great Bill Kunstler, he said to me once, he said, you know, Yusef, as we're fighting appeal after appeal and losing appeal after appeal, he said, this case is such a case that in this predominantly Christian country, Jesus Christ himself couldn't have won this case for you. It was the understanding that he was trying to give me that that's how bad they wanted me. It had nothing to do with truth, but had everything to do with the color of my skin, the height that I had, the gait in my walk. It had everything to do with what I represented and what they were trying to kill. And so if I could succumb to the pressure of the oppression that they were heaping up on me, then I would fail in life. But when you're walking through hell, as I said earlier, you got to keep on walking. Because we know, and I don't like to use the word DNA, because DNA, even though it's a word, to me, it's a flimsy word against the true word, deoxyribonucleic acid. Because when you hear that word, what? Yeah. That has weight to it. Yeah, if deoxyribonucleic acid is there, you did it. But they can indict a ham sandwich according to the law.
Right.
It's not about the truth. It's about who can tell the best story. And so now we're talking about economics. We're talking about redlining. We're talking about the creators of poverty. We're talking about reparations and why. And if we're really talking about reparations, then America will be bankrupt. Because just like we saw in the film Black Panther, right? The young man is in the museum and he's looking around and he's like, wow, hey, what is this? What is that? And he begins to get an answer and he says, no, these are the stolen artifacts from my people. We are just going to take them back.
Yeah.
Right? And it's the way that history is being told. Because if they can teach a history and say, we are savage, if they could teach a history and say, we are the criminals, then as we get into the elevators with a white person, they hold their purse.
Right.
We didn't steal nobody from no country. And I'm saying that because as we look at it all, it begins to become absurd. When the truth of the matter is that to understand the person is to walk vicariously in their shoes. That's one of the things that punching the air gives. Punching the air gives the reader the opportunity to understand, am I in my policing just like the officer with the tattoo of the black and brown baby with nooses around their necks? Am I like that cop? Am I like that teacher, Miss Rinaldi, who is a character witness in negativity to this boy that needs everything? All of the stuff that's in the book. I mean, it's beautiful because when you think about it, this is not my story, but this is the story of Black and brown America. This is the story of how they try to paint a picture and tell a truth that's not the truth. They tried to, I mean, not to reveal too much about the book, but it's been out. We've been on the bestsellers list for 5 weeks now, so that's a pretty great feat.
It's remarkable.
But,
congratulations.
yeah, thank you. One of the things that is in the book that they talk about is this skateboard. And, you know, Amal has a skateboard and the DA is trying to present and convince the jury that Amal hit the child with the skateboard.
Right.
But there is no deoxyribonucleic acid on the skateboard to show that Amal hit and Amal didn't hit the child with the skateboard. It's the same idea of what happened in the Central Park jogger case. You have Kevin Richardson with his mother and father and perhaps sister in the background saying, I got this scratch on my face because I was struggling with a jogger and she scratched me. Well, the truth of that can be found immediately.
Right.
Because then we can do forensic evidence and look underneath the fingernails of the jogger and find out there is no skin from Kevin Richardson there. And that's the saddest part about how these stories get blown out of proportion, because they create these false narratives, and then we have to fight against it. I had a divorce lawyer fighting for me in a criminal case. And I'm not saying that because I had poor defense. That's not why I'm saying that. I'm saying that because that's the only defense we had. That's what we could afford. A friend of the family who happened to be a divorce attorney. That's the only thing we could afford.
Well, as you say, in that case, Jesus and all his lawyers probably could not have exonerated you individuals, but you were in time.
Well, I wanna read this to you.
Absolutely.
And I think it's perhaps it paints a really important picture as what the criminal justice system is. And this is from my late great attorney, William Kunstler, May 13th, 1995, SUNY Buffalo. He says, and that's the terrible myth of organized society, that everything that's done through the established system is legal. That word has a powerful psychological impact. It makes people believe that there is an order to life and an order to a system. And that person that goes through this order and is convicted has gotten all that is due him. And therefore society can turn off its consciousness and look to other things in other times. He goes on to say, and that's the terrible thing about these past trials. They have this aura of legitimacy, this aura of legality. I suspect that better men than the world has known, and more of them, have gone to their deaths through a legal system than all the illegalities in the history of man. 6 million people in Europe during the Third Reich, legal. Sacco Vanzetti, quite legal. The Haymarket defendants, legal. The hundreds of rape trials throughout the South where Black men were condemned to death, all legal. Jesus, legal. Socrates, legal. And then he finishes this thought and says, and that's the kaleidoscopic nature of what we live through here and in other places. Because all tyrants learn that it is far better to do this thing through some semblance of legality than to do it without that pretense.
That is powerful. I mean, it is painful poetry, to say the least. Dr. Yusef Salaam, the book is called Punching the Air. It is a bestseller. It is available everywhere. I would suggest any parent, anybody should get it and read it, particularly, I think, parents of kids of color, Black and brown kids. As we go into a gifting season, I can think of, honestly, probably no better gift for anyone to give to anyone. Doctor, I want to thank you so much for sharing your time, sharing your insights and your experience. One of the things I just find remarkable is that for all you've been through, you are a model of hope and inspiration. And I appreciate that despite what the system has done to you, you believe that we all should participate in this democracy, because if we don't own it, it will own us. Thank you so much, Doctor. I appreciate it. Please stay well during this pandemic. My best to you and your loved ones.
Thank you. Blessings.
To everybody watching, I want to thank you for joining us again in our Social Justice Summit, Art Activated 2020. We're going to continue tonight. We have a conversation with Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes, and then we'll be back tomorrow with more conversations. If you've missed anything, it's all archived, nostudios.com. I would encourage you to go and check out the conversations. They are important, they are urgent, they are wonderful. Thank you so much. We'll see you later. Thank you.
We know systemic change happens when we demand it. And I believe that our actions, as not only the Milwaukee Bucks organization, but as the NBA, we have displayed the power that we have for change. Voting gives us that ability to dismantle inequities and fight racism. We can't let others determine our future. Make sure you are registered to vote. It is imperative, more so now than ever.
I would say first, my role is to respect one another and see values and respect where we come from and where we're going.
I feel like the dance experience is kind of a heart-to-heart, spirit-to-spirit conversation. I want it to hit you in the heart, and then you feel like, oh, I feel their grief. I feel their perseverance. I have that. I feel their liberation.
The whole soul in my work just functions by my love for information. The goal is to really show an audience that it is okay for artists of color to expose themselves.
Art is only art if it communicates. There's almost a conversation every day about some sort of privilege. As I've just gotten older, I'm more interested in putting work out there that might just allow somebody to have a conversation.
It's your boy, Nile X Nile. Music to me is freedom. It's a sense of security and knowing that I can literally express off the top of my head anytime I feel without regrets. I enjoy just being a part of something as big as this. And that's what I feel like music means to me.
When she be on a baby rude, I treat it like ice and I keep it cool.
Music to me is the greatest form of expression. It's versatile, multifaceted. It's just whatever you need it to be in whatever moment you want it. It's like the alpha and the omega type shit. There is nothing without music, you know?
When I'm listening to music, it makes me feel like I'm the only person in the world. It helps me alleviate all my problems and allows me to escape into a song in a different universe.
Music is my soul, and the reason why I feel empowered to be myself every day. Without it, I probably would be a boring person. Am I supposed to keep talking?
I'm a 5'2" little beast when it come to this. I'm the light.
That is really what music means to me. It is the thing I need when I'm feeling a little crazy. Music is everything to me. It's a release, it's work, it's patience and practice.